Long-distance philanthropists are legion, and we might call them each a saint elsewhere, that is. Harriet Beecher Stowe was one such famous saint elsewhere. Yes, Harriet, Uncle Tom had it rough in the old South, but was your precious New England a beacon of human rights? Of course not. As Harriet toiled away on a work of fiction, the young from her own town, some as ripe as 7 years, toiled away in factories just a few blocks from Harriet's finely crafted desk, and they often worked longer hours than Southern slaves. Factory workers, you see, paid no heed to nature outside of the dark, smoky bowels of industry, and they were not blessed with times of rest, due to cycles, seasons, or storms. No, the factory worker, be he 7 or 70, worked no matter what. But Harriet did not care. She was on the nice side of town, and she only noticed the factory if the winds shifted. It's never been socially acceptable to help white people, so we can't blame Harriet for her stance. We can make note, however, of the fact that the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, while factory kids worked under the lash of industry until the early 1900s. Yes, actual lashes. Some children were beaten to death. Harriet never heard their cries. She was traveling. In 1853, our dear Harriet went to Scotland, where she met the Duchess of St. Elsewhere, Madame Sutherland, who made a profession of hosting tea parties for downtrodden, though conspicuously absent, Africans. Meanwhile, she busied herself with the local Scottish peasantry. Looking out at her starving tenants, a servant reports that the 19th Countess of Sutherland mused, "Scotch people are of happier constitution, and do not fatten like the larger breed of animals." In a letter we read her asking her hired strongmen to trounce these people who wish to destroy our system. The Sutherlands, you see, had a new system. In their greed, they did not feel they made enough money from the traditional farming methods of the peasantry, and they wanted them gone. They claimed for themselves, and only themselves, lands that had been farmed by local peasants for centuries, forcibly drove them from the land, burned their homes, sometimes while still occupied, and created thousands of brand new homeless Highlanders, which they promptly replaced with sheep. Ah, that fine Scottish wool! Perhaps the Duchess knitted a sweater or two for a slave in the American South, the chosen land of her long-distance philanthropy. Madame Sutherland, we do not need wool sweaters in the South. Give them to your homeless peasants, knocking at the borders of your vast estate. Imagine that. A duchess with the largest private estate in the country hosting a prim and proper tea party at one of her castles, with the lofty goal of raising awareness on behalf of the poor, downtrodden African slave abused and whipped in the American South, while outside her estate's trim gardens and lofty walls, thousands of peasants were driven from their modest huts, as torches thrown on the Duchess' command lit their ancestral homes ablaze. How magnanimous, how wonderful for a duchess to care about a black slave all the way across the sea. As her fine china teacups clinked, the Scottish peasants cried. Harriet called the Duchess enlightened. Oh, Harriet, what is enlightened about burning old women alive in their modest huts? Margaret Mackay was her name. We should remember her. This stubborn, elderly woman was pulled from her burning hut, but she died shortly thereafter, just another victim of the Highland clearances. We should also remember the Duchess, never forget and never forgive. Her victims were local peasants, and they were white, so no one cared. St. Elsewhere looks elsewhere to cry about human rights. I wonder how many European St. Elsewheres regret their Middle Eastern altruism now that the masses have migrated and are knocking at their doors. Perhaps they haven't yet made it to the nice side of town. Perhaps the immigrants are encamped atop the lower classes, and the saints do not care, as long as they remain elsewhere.